Hi, Peter Charles here, folks, for fly fishing, and welcome to my video on getting started in fly fishing. Now, you might have heard of people talking about fishing with nymphs or nymphing, and they're talking about indicators and split shot and all this kind of good stuff. So in this video, I'm going to go into what they're actually using, what they're actually doing, and I'm going to supply a little footage in the video so you can see what it actually looks like when I'm out there fishing with a nymph under an indicator. So first off, what is a nymph? A nymph is a fly that looks like the type of insect that lives on the bottom among the rocks and eventually grows up to be either a mayfly or caddisfly that flies away and mates in the trees. But they spend most of their life living on the bottom, and they look, something like this. So when you hear people talking about nymphing, they're talking about using a fly that looks like this. Or there's quite a variety, but you get the idea. The idea is the fly is designed to sink. It's designed to be fished along the bottom. So how do they do that? Well, they have the fly, and they've got a short bit of what we tip it, and there's a knot here, and above the knot they've got some split shot, and you can see that on camera against my shirt. There's a weight there, and that pulls it down. So the fly's unweighted, but this has the weight. Now, how do you tell if you got a fish? Well, at the other end you have an indicator. It's a bobber. Okay, fly fishermen call them indicators, but they're bobbers. And so this whole thing suspends the fly under the indicator, held down by the split shot, and when a fish takes it, it goes down, or might go to the side. It does something. So you know there's a fish there. And of course the other end of the leader is attached to your fly line. So you've got the fly line, you've got some leader, you've got an indicator, you have split shot, and the fly. So when they fish this, and I'll throw in some footage and I'll talk over it. Basically what's happening is they're casting the split shot and the fly upstream, making what we call a mend, which positions the fly line behind the indicator. You never want it in front. And then that indicator and fly drifts down naturally, down the current, till the end of the drift, and then they pick it up, reposition it, put it back up again, and do it again. It's repetitive. You keep cycling through, and you want to cover fresh water each time you do it. So you normally would start fishing close to yourself and then move out and fish further and further away. And then once you've gone through that section, you move down and repeat the process. So you try to cover the water as thoroughly as you can, because the fish don't move very far to take a nymph. I mean, the fish is sitting behind a rock, and something this tiny comes drifting by. It's not going to chase it all over the stream. It just comes out of the rock, grabs it, comes back down again. And that's all they're doing, just going. So if your nymph doesn't go in that window where the trout will move for it, it'll ignore it. It'll go right by. And it's only when your nymph goes in that little window of how much effort the trout is willing to expend to get it, that's when it's likely to hit your fly, which is the reason why we have to cover water when we do it. So I can get into that in more detail in subsequent videos when I get out on the water and we discuss what I'm actually doing. But I wanted to get that into this video to start with so you have an understanding of what I'm actually doing when I'm on the water with this rig. The rest of this video, I'm actually going to look at the rig itself and what's involved. Now, I do have a video on tying leaders, making leaders for nymphing with indicators. So I'm not going to get into the leader construction because I've already covered that. But I'm going to get into the rest of the rig, which I did not cover in that video. The most obvious part of the nymphing with an indicator is this, what we call the strike indicator or the bobber. And I'm going to look at some different types and what's good and bad about them and what I end up using. So this is the type I first started to use. It's got a toothpick. You run your fly line through the hole, and then you slide your toothpick on. And then when the toothpick gets wet, it swells up and it holds everything in place. Now, it works pretty good, and I've done quite well with these. I've caught a bunch of fish on these. But there are problems. You can see this one's breaking. And you use these enough. You look at all the cracks. You use these enough and they start to get sloppy and they don't grip anymore. And you try to find bigger toothpicks and that just makes them crack worse. So they have a shelf life. They are also, if you're casting a sloppy, they will move. They'll slide down your leader. I've actually had the opportunity to see an angler fishing with the distance between his fly and his indicator was about this much. The indicator slid right down to a split shot, and because he was overhead casting and it was moving, and people were telling him, like, you got to move that indicator up, and he was just like, he moved it up, it would slide back down. He finally gave up and just fished it with his fly, that far below the indicator, which was, of course, a waste of time. So these things do move, and they do break up. I mean, it's actually coming apart in my hand. I'm feeling bits fall off. But that's what I started with, and, if the fit is tight, they do work. Okay, another popular type is these yarn indicators, and they've got a little rubber ring on them, and you loop-to-loop connect them to your leader, and they work up to a point as long as the weight underneath them is not very heavy. So very good for very slow runs where you're not going to use very much weight. I found that if you use any amount of weight, they sink, and you have to put fly float on them or they will sink. They'll sink. If I just use this thing just like it is, this little yarn indicator, it wouldn't stay floating for very long. You've got to really work the fly floatant into that to get it to stay up. And even then, if you use the split shot that I'm using on this fella here, this split shot right here, I'll use something that heavy, or maybe two of these, goes under the water. So the other thing I found is they often leave kinks in your leader, but they are easy to adjust. Like these guys here, they're very easy to adjust. And so when you're going down different parts of the run and you have to set your indicator at different depths, they both work easily. Now, another technique you can use, which is what I have here, is the same kind of indicator that I had before, that cork indicator that's colored, but you can see I've got rubber bobber stoppers on it. And this is something from conventional fishing. You get these bobber stoppers and you can buy them. They're used from float fishing and that sort of thing. They work just fine for fly fishing as well. And so I wouldn't be bashful about using this setup with bobber stoppers. And they are adjustable, which is nice. And there's no problem with casting these. You won't notice them on the line. They work just fine. So that's another opportunity to, instead of using the toothpick, you use rubber bobber stoppers. And you're good to go. Another choice we have for indicator is using this putty. You can stick it on your leader and then, take it off, put it back in the container, reuse it. It doesn't hold a lot of weight, so if you're using a lot of split shot, this won't hold it up. It casts quite well because it's not very big. It's probably the best casting indicator you can use. But moving it's a bit of a pain. It leaves the residue on your leader, and it doesn't support a lot of weight. But, when you're working with a little bit of weight and casting is important, this is really good. I think the other thing that's good about this is it's not that noticeable to the fish. I mean, if you're going to use something like this thing, big pink, there's bigger ones than this. I mean, sometimes in clear water, if fish have been fished over quite a bit, they see these things and they know there's a bad thing on the end and they just avoid it. These are a little bit more stealthy, but the visibility is not as good. You have to be really paying attention to these when you're using them. Now there's another style of indicator which I really don't like. It has this little hole here, and again it's a loop-to-loop connection. These things really put a kink in your leader, and I really don't like them at all. I've used them, but by the time you adjusted your indicator a few times, your leader looks like this. So I generally don't use them anymore. I mean, you can use them if you wanted to. There's ways to build dropper loops that you could use to put the indicator on. There's options, but there's a lot of fiddling, and that kind of thing works, It works as far as an indicator is concerned, but I don't like what it does to the leader, and I don't like the adjustment component of it. The last indicator I'm going to talk about is my personal favorite, and one I use a lot. It's called Airlock, and what airlock has is this indicator that has this little screwed on lid and this slot in the threaded part, and that's where your line goes. And so you tighten that thread down onto your leader. Doesn't damage the leader. It actually has a little rubber gasket in there to keep it from being damaged. And you could just loosen it off, move it, tighten it. It's the easiest thing in the world to use. So if you're going to go out and buy leaders, I have no affiliation with this company. I used to be with Rage Sports a while back, but I have no affiliation anymore. But, you know, I really, really do recommend airlock leaders. I really do think they're great. So I'm going to put that with the list. There's what we're going to work with. There are airlock leaders, my recommendation for using an indicator. And they come in different sizes. They come in small, medium, large, lots of choice. So keep those in mind the next time you want to go set up, when you want to go set up a nymphing rig. If you've been using something like this or this, you know, our little corky or our little yarn, and you're not really crazy about the results, go get some airlock leaders, indicators. They work fine. Now, as far as the weight is concerned, I've got some lead here. Don't use it. It's damaging to the environment, you know, and one of the problems they have with this is that it ends up on the bottom, and ducks come along and, you know, they're feeding on the algae and stuff, and they're picking this stuff off the bottom as well. You're laying lead. It's toxic. You're putting lead all over the bottom, and it's really not a good plan. So there are other alternatives. You can get this stuff here, which is not lead, and this is quite small too. This is more suitable for fly fishing. A lot of the split shots that you get in these packets are really intended for conventional fishing, and they're often too heavy from what we need. So you can use this tin shot, and it works just fine. I've used this stuff for years, and I got a replacement pack, so when this gets empty, I've got some more. Now, there's another choice. It's called Snake River Mud, or there's a number of names for it. There's a variety of them. And what it is a paste, and you can put it on your leader. It's put out by Loon. And you can put it on your leader, and it acts like split shot. So you just put it on, and you can peel it off and put it back. That stuff works pretty good, too. But as I say, I tend to use this non-toxic split shot. The last thing we can do is put the weight right on our flies. You can see these hare's ear flies have a tungsten bead on the front. And so instead of putting split shot on your leader, you put tungsten on the fly, and down it goes. So what's the benefit? I've got an unweighted fly here with a split shot and an unweighted fly, or weighted flies. So what should you be using? Well, it depends. I think in fast water, the unweighted fly can get kicked around. You might lose the connection between the split shot and the fly as it's bouncing around. And so a fish takes that and can actually move with the fly before you see the indicator move. If you're using a weighted fly, it's a direct path to the weighted fly between the indicator and the weighted fly, so when a fish touches it, you see the movement. So strike detection is probably better with weighted flies. If you use jig hooks with weighted flies, they're also more snag resistant. You're less likely to snag up on the bottom. You can really bounce the fly along the bottom and not snag up. So that's a good thing with the weighted fly approach. The downside is that in slower conditions, the weighted fly can look pretty dead. The unweighted fly, you know, kicks around a little bit in the current. It looks a little bit more natural. So you might actually get more hits on the unweighted fly, but catch more fish on the weighted fly simply because you know there's a fish there. I think experienced fly fishers do quite well with unweighted flies, but I think when you're starting out, you might find the unweighted fly to be a bit of a problem. Now, something else you can do. Now, you can use flies that don't have a lot of weight, like these dark caddis flies that you see in the middle there. They don't have a lot of weight on them, so you can combine a lightly weighted fly with a small amount of split shot, and you've got sort of a good compromise. You've got enough weight to get down. The fly is the bottom of the system. It's not moving around too much, so there's a direct connection between the fly and the indicator, and yet it doesn't have a lot of weight, so it does have some movement. It doesn't look totally dead. It looks like there is some life in that thing. So that's the third alternative, is a little bit of split shot and a little bit of weight on the fly. That's another way to go. It might be the best, actually, if you're starting out in fly fishing and this is your first opportunity nymphing. So the thing about nymphing, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, I'll emphasize it now, is the vast majority of the food that trout eat are insects along the bottom, mostly caddisflies, stoneflies, mayflies, chironomids. They're caught along the bottom. Those insects are living amongst the rocks, and they're feeding on those. The dry fly feeding is only an occasional thing. That's something like 90-95% of the food that trout eat are the insects along the bottom. So nymphing is the way to catch a lot of trout, and it's also the way to catch trout when you're not seeing any dry fly activity. So it's a very effective way of fishing. As I say, like I mentioned at the beginning, there are techniques to make sure that you fish effectively. You want that dead drift of the indicator and the fly going down the stream together. You don't want things dragging, and we'll get into that in a later video of how to avoid that. But once you've mastered a few basic things, you can catch a lot of fish on nymphs. So there you go. The basic setup for an indicator nymphing rig. Very effective. You can catch a lot of fish with them and have a lot of fun with them. Cheers.